An often heard refrain from Israelis and Palestinians in regards to the peace process is that, quote, "we have no partner for peace," end quote. Israelis accuse Palestinian leadership of rejecting peace overtures, and Palestinians accuse Israeli leadership of subverting the peace process as well. The narratives mirror each other. This leads me to ask the question: in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, are there viable partners for peace? Today I want to discuss Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and investigate the question, is Bibi a partner for peace? Considering Netanyahu is Israel's longest tenured prime minister and has dominated much of the last 13 years of Israeli politics, it is important to understand his relationship with the peace process and his opinions about it. In order to understand Netanyahu and his policies related to the peace process, we must first understand the foundations of his ideological worldview. These trace back to the beginnings of the revisionist Zionist movement that arose as a critique of labor Zionism in the 1920s. The mainstream labor Zionist movement, led by Chaim Weizmann and David Ben-Gurion, advocated for a gradualist and political approach to achieving the goal of Jewish statehood in Palestine. They sought for international recognition and legitimacy for their movement, advocating for negotiations and political deals to achieve this ends. And in the mind of Zeev Jabotinsky, a Russian Jew and founder of the revisionist Zionist movement, this approach was not only naive, but was a fundamentally futile endeavor. Jabotinsky argued that Palestinian Arabs were never going to abandon their lands without a fight, and that Zionists must use force to achieve a future state. This was most popularly articulated in his famed essay, The Iron Wall. The second main plank of revisionist Zionism is territorial maximalism. Jabotinsky argued that Zionists should not settle for what the British or other European powers decided to be the land of Israel, but should rather maximize their territory for the future Jewish state. This meant that Jewish settlement on both banks of the Jordan River, meaning present-day Israel, the occupied territories, and the country of Jordan. After Jabotinsky's death in 1940s, Menachem Begin, another Zionist, took up the mantle of leadership in the revisionist movement. Begin's Irgun militia carried out a campaign of guerrilla attacks against British and Palestinians in their effort to achieve a Jewish state. Branded as extremists, the Irgun gained infamy for their role in the bombing of the King David Hotel in 1946 and their massacre of Palestinian civilians at the village of Deir Yassin in 1948. Begin rejected the 1947 UN partition plan that would eventually help lead to the creation of the State of Israel because he feared that it would negate his dream of Greater Israel, remember, on both banks of the Jordan River. More moderate Zionists branded Begin as an extremist, and prominent American Jews, such as Albert Einstein and Hannah Arendt, even protested his 1948 visit to the US, accusing him of a form of fascism. Criticisms aside, Begin and the revisionist movement remained a potent opposition force in Israel. In the 1930s and 40s, another prominent revisionist Zionist made a name for himself. This individual was Benjamin Netanyahu. You may recognize that name. This is Bibi's father. He emerged as a fierce advocate for revisionist Zionism in both America and abroad. The elder Netanyahu argued against the partition of Palestine in 1947, even co-sponsoring a full-page ad in the New York Times rejecting the idea of a future Palestinian state. He encouraged Israel to conquer all disputed land, even if it meant years of war, and he often used derogatory stereotypes when discussing Arabs. While Ben Zion's political career never got off the ground, he did relocate to Israel and tried to get into politics that never quite took off. He imparted much of his politics to his son Benjamin. Bibi Netanyahu split his formative years between the US and Israel. eventually earning an advanced degree at MIT in the 1970s. While working in the US in the 70s, Netanyahu made a name for himself in media circles as an eloquent advocate for Israel and the positions of Menachem Begin's Likud party. During this period, he frequently argued against the creation of a Palestinian state, and that the creation of such would be used as a base to attack Israel. Netanyahu later returned to Israel and began work first in the nonprofit or think tank world, and then later in the diplomatic corps, serving as an ambassador to the UN and as chief of mission to the United States. In the 1990s, Netanyahu's political career really took off, and he emerged as one of the most vocal opponents of the Oslo Accords, the first steps of mutual recognition between the Palestinian people and the Israeli people. In a 1993 op-ed in the New York Times, he described a future Palestinian state as, quote, a mortal threat to Israel and a guarantee of increased tension, future terrorism, and ultimately future war, end quote. This was in line with the Likud party, which pledged its commitment to Israeli sovereignty to all the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea in its 1977 charter. As the Oslo Accords progressed, the Israeli rights rhetoric became more intense. And after an extremist assassinated Yitzhak Rabin in 1995, Rabin's widow and others in the labor movement and among the Israeli left accused Netanyahu of helping incite violence that eventually led to the assassination of a sitting Israeli prime minister. However, in 1996, Bibi was elected prime minister for the first time in his career, largely campaigning on security issues while blaming the Labour Party of neglecting security in their effort to achieve peace with the Palestinians. After his election, Netanyahu pledged to honor the Oslo Accords, but he stated some reservations with the agreement. He later pledged his own conditions around Oslo, asserting that there would be no withdrawal from the disputed territories of the Golan Heights, no negotiations on the status of Jerusalem, and that he would not accept any preconditions from the Palestinians for future negotiations with them. Within 6 months of taking office, Netanyahu enacted policies of expanding settlement construction in the occupied territories, one of the biggest points of contention amongst Palestinians and the Israelis at the time. During his first term, settlement construction nearly doubled from 1996 to 1999. Oslo effectively stalled during Netanyahu's first term, and after losing his a bid for second term in 1999, Benjamin Netanyahu lost control of the Likud party. Oslo would eventually fall off the map as well with the emergence of the Second Intifada. While in the political wilderness, Netanyahu maintained his hardline approach to peace talks, opposing Israel's withdrawal from Gaza in 2004 and opposing a ceasefire with Hamas in 2008. Netanyahu won his second term as Israel's prime minister in 2009, and for the first time in his career, Benjamin Netanyahu committed in principle to the idea of an independent Palestinian state, but with several caveats. No Palestinian military, Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem, and the allowance for natural growth of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, territory that was meant to be land for a future Palestinian state. He expanded settlement construction in the West Bank again over his predecessors and relaxed prosecutions of Israeli extremists in their attacks against Palestinians, groups like the Hilltop Youth and the Price Tag movement. During his second tenure, Bibi's governments moved more progressively to the right. In his most recent government, he has included individuals from the religious Zionist movement that have been prosecuted for basically terrorism. And despite several flare-ups with the Islamist terrorist group Hamas, he has facilitated cash transfers, or Benjamin Netanyahu has facilitated cash transfers to the group, a move he's justified to his own party as necessary to thwart a Palestinian state. At several moments during his tenure as prime minister, he's boasted about his role in frustrating the peace process. And so this leads me all back to the simple question I began with. With this information in mind, Is Benjamin Netanyahu a viable partner for peace?